Hello and welcome to this Hack the Hive update from Swarm HQ in Glasgow. I'm Jacob Corderan and I'm a senior engineer and team lead, and with the help of some of my colleagues I've had the pleasure of keeping you busy by introducing some bugs into our Hack the Hive site.
And I'm Marianne Young. I'm responsible for managing Swarm's marketing and communications, and met many of you at our stand at Scotland JS. Last week, we wrapped up our Hack the Hive challenge at the Scotland JS conference in Edinburgh, which generated a great deal of interest from people trying their hand at breaking into the Hive. For those of you who missed it, we invited people to hack their way into our simulated social media site called The Hive to find a unique code hidden somewhere within.
Now, understandably, a lot of you have been in touch asking what the solution was. A lot of the vulnerabilities that we introduced into the site were based on real flaws in actual websites. Obviously, we exaggerated them slightly and added a few clues in along the way to help you. But nevertheless, to hack the Hive, you required a little coding knowledge, plenty of curiosity, and a lot of patience. Now, shortly, we're going to be speaking to our Hack the Hive winner. But first, here is how to hack the Hive.
So for those of you who had a go at hacking the Hive, this web page will probably be quite familiar to you. What we're going to be doing is a quick walkthrough of the various vulnerabilities that were placed in the site, and more importantly, how to find them and exploit them. Now, you didn't need any specialist software to do this, no pen testing tools or network scanners, command line utilities or anything like that. You could achieve this with just a regular web browser with the developer tools functionality. Now, you may have struggled to do this on a mobile device, so I'd recommend having used a desktop browser just for that additional functionality and, of course, the additional screen space that you get to work with. We're going to be using Google Chrome for this demonstration, just because I think more people would be most familiar with it, but other web browsers do exist and would work perfectly well for the purposes of this. Just before I do start, of course, I know where all the bugs are. When you were doing this, you'd have been doing it blind, and that would have meant a lot of patience as you went down some dead ends and looking in places where maybe vulnerabilities didn't even exist and having to start all over again. So you might have invested a lot more time in this than I'm going to take as I go through this demonstration, but I appreciate everybody's patience as they went through hunting for these vulnerabilities that I'm about to show you. So let's start. This is the login page for our simulated social media site, The Hive. And all we've really got on this page is a username and password box that we can type something into. So there were two routes that people might have taken at this point. One would have been to essentially take a lucky guess. So we might have a user called admin, and if we're really lucky, their password will also be admin. Let's try logging in with that. Okay, well, it's incorrect, but we can also try another, maybe admin1, and put an exclamation mark in the password box. All right, well, that's incorrect as well. But what we're doing here is brute forcing. So essentially, we're guessing the password a lot of times. And you'd normally automate something like this with a script so that you can fire a lot of guesses at it in quick succession. Now, luckily for us, there is an easier way of doing this. And the other path you might have taken, if you're a little bit more curious, is to open up your developer tools and have a look at the markup of the web page, the actual HTML. So in the dev tools, obviously, we can expand and collapse all these nodes of HTML markup. If I expand the head here, very conveniently, the very first thing we see is an HTML comment that says demo account, and it's got demo user and demo123, which looks suspiciously like a username and password. Now, because it's an HTML comment, it doesn't get rendered in the actual page. So it's not visible there, but it's not a very good way of hiding any secrets because, as you can see, it's easily readable when you open up the source of the web page. So let's take advantage of that and hope that it's a login for our website. So we're going to use demo user and demo123, demo user and the password demo123. Right, well, we've logged in with that and we've managed to get through to our top secret news feed. Now, if you look at this page, you can see there's not really anything to interact with as such. There's a lot of content that's scrolling through. And as you can see, every few seconds, a new news item gets added to the top of the feed. There's a new one now. So before we take a look at how that's happening, we've also got a little drop-down menu here. And we've got a button that goes to my profile, so we can take a look at that. Again, apart from some stats and some contact information, There's nothing for us to interact with here, so let's go back to our feed page. So as we saw, there's newsfeed items which are periodically getting loaded into this page, which means that we're probably looking at something that's talking to a backend, probably an API. But let's confirm that by having a look at our network tab. I'll just clear that so it's a little bit less cluttered. But as you can see, we've got requests being sent to this feed endpoint. And if I click on that and have a look at the headers, we can see what the URL for that API endpoint is. So /API/feed is our endpoint. And here we're sending a post request to it. And what we're getting back in the response looks like a JavaScript object, sorry, a JSON object with all the information for a single newsfeed item. So we've got a title, maybe some content, and maybe some names of some avatars that are being used. So at this point, what you might have done is looked at that API and thought, right, well, if I try sending a request to that, what do I get back? And if you do this in a very simple way by opening that in a new tab, you'll notice that instead of seeing the API, you get logged straight back out. Now, this was one of the more frustrating elements of it in that you had to get the request exactly right for it to work. What we did there, by opening it in a new tab, we've sent a GET request, whereas that API only accepts POST requests. So some of the HTTP verbs aren't supported and you just get logged out for attempting it. So let's go back into our news feed and we can attempt something different. Now, because I know the route through this, I can tell you that the feed API actually offers nothing of interest to us. It literally just sends us these new newsfeed items and there's nothing for us to really look at. So let's go back into our developer tools and back into the markup, because there might be something in here that we can have a look at which wasn't in our login page. In the body here, we can have a look and expand all these divs. Anything going on in here? List containers. Oh, there's a script in here. Ah, right. So in line, we can see there is a JavaScript function. I don't know whether it's been called or not, but there's a lot of comments in here. So let's just break this down and have a look at what it's doing. So the function's called query database, which raises a few red flags straight away. And the comment says it's a helper to query the database from JavaScript. We just pass in a table name and an array of column names. So for those of you familiar with JavaScript, you'll notice that this is sending off an XML HTTP request, otherwise known as an AJAX request, because we're using asynchronous JavaScript and XML to make a request to this API and get some sort of response back. Now, we don't really need to know much about how this works because we've actually got some examples down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this function. If I just say edit as HTML, I can select it all and I can copy it from there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the console. Let's just make that a little bit bigger so that you can see it. And I'm going to paste this into the console. Now at this point, we just have a function definition, but we want to uncomment one of these lines, which is actually going to query it. So we've got the definition of our function, and then our second line down here, we are passing in some example parameters. So in this case, we've got our table name. So the first parameter is a table name called biscuit inventory. And then our array of columns, we've got a column called type and a column called quantity. So let's see what this gives us back. Okay, so we've got another JSON object that's come back here. We've got our biscuit inventory table, and we've got one record, which is a hobnob. We've got 32 of them. And our second record, we've got choc chip, and we've got 11 of them. Okay, so we now know we can query a database using JavaScript. And again, this is not a good thing. You don't want to be querying a database using JavaScript. You want to make sure that all of that is handled in your backend and you can't do anything from the client side. But this is available to us, so we might as well use it. And our second example here is querying a database table called users. And we're going to pass in the column names of username and password. So if I just select that there, we can copy that and put that into our console and run that from here. So our response here is users, and our first user here is username admin. Password, now it's a very short password, but it wasn't admin. It was a capital S, a lowercase w, an @ symbol, a lowercase r, and a capital M. And you can see the second record that we got back here was this demo user with demo123, but we already know about them. We're more interested in this admin user. So what I've got to do now is make a note of this password. I can remember admin, but this password here, I suppose I better copy this, and if I can grab that, copy it, and I'll log out and paste that into the login page. So just before I log out of this demo account, let me just show you something that you are unable to do whilst logged in as a demo user. I'm looking at this individual file here, which is avatar3.png, but some of you may have noticed this file path that it's being served up from. So in the API, we've got this directory of file, images, avatars. And if you were being a little bit curious, maybe what you'd have done is try to browse this file directory. So let's take a look and see if we can do that. Okay, no, we get logged out as we did before. But this time, let's try going back in as the administrator using the password which we just found from the database. So now you can see I'm logged in as the Swarm admin account. And this time you'd expect us to have some sort of elevated permissions, maybe some extra rights to do something that we weren't able to do before. Now, because you're going into this blind, of course, it's a case of trial and error to try and find out what you might be able to do now that you wouldn't have been able to do under that demo account. So again, let's just take a look at one of these individual files. This is avatar 1. And this time, let's see if we can look at the file directory as an administrator. Okay, so it turns out we still can't do that. So that's not a permission that being an administrator grants us, but that doesn't mean there isn't anything that we can do. Let's just try going back in there again. This time, maybe instead of looking at the file directory, what if we look at the images directory and see if that gives us anything? Nope, we've been kicked back out again, but this is all about persistence. So we just need to keep going and see if we can find anything that lets us in. So finally, instead of file, instead of images, let's look at this lowest level avatars directory. And in this case, we do get through to a directory listing. Now, this is the point where a lot of you are so tantalizingly close to getting, and you'd all managed to log in as an administrator, but it was this trial and error of finding the exact file path that would give you a directory listing. So at this point, we can now click through all the files in this directory. So here's avatar 2, for example, but the one that's probably caught your eye is secretfile.txt. Nice and obvious once you're in here. We click that, and congratulations, you have successfully hacked the Hive. So this is the point that 15 of you managed to get through to, and you get given a unique code, which you could have tweeted us to enter our prize draw. Like I say, this point was nothing too technical. It didn't require any special tools. This was just about persistence and patience and trying all those different permutations. And as it's based on a real-world site, this is a real-world vulnerability whereby the majority of the directory listings were locked down, but there was one directory listing which was left open and allowed you to browse all the files in there once you were logged in as an administrator.
So that's how it was done. Looking at the logs, it seems that loads of you were just one step away from finding that final clue.
Yep, almost 200 people attempted the challenge, and the server had to handle 1.4 million requests. By the time the challenge came to a close, just 15 successful hackers found the final clue. The lucky winner of our prize draw was Callum, who's with us here today. Hi, Callum.
Hello.
Hiya.
So how did you find out about Hack the Hive? Because obviously you weren't at Scotland JS, were you?
No, unfortunately I missed Scotland JS. I was actually quite lucky with the timing of it all. I was on Twitter at the right time, and you guys tweeted my manager, Jerry Grant, who then retweeted it, and luckily it popped up in my timeline. So it was kind of good timing for that.
Oh, great. And how difficult did you find it?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't easy. I think you guys are very smart in the way that it wasn't kind of obvious what to attack. So I mean, once you got into the web application, there was no kind of direct path that would take you to the answer. It was almost a case of, and I think someone even kind of gave out this hint of be nosy, just kind of go looking around. Vulnerabilities in web applications aren't always going to be obvious, so I think it was pretty smart the way you guys set it up.
Oh, great. And how long did it take you in total then?
It took me about 3 hours in total, an hour and a half in the morning, and then I gave up, and then about an hour and a half at night when I had another stab at it.
Nice, good effort.
Thank you.
Now, we were chatting earlier, and you're actually a graduate of ethical hacking. What is that?
So I studied ethical hacking at the University of Aberdeen, Dundee. Just graduated in July there. The premise of the course is it takes a thief to catch a thief. So it's looking at the offensive side of security. So how can we stop attackers doing what they do if we don't know how they're doing it in the first place? So by hiring people like myself in 5 years' time, when I'm a bit more trained up, your organisation can have a real life hacker come in, show what their vulnerabilities are, but then report it in a professional manner, so the organisation can then go and fix themselves.
And the traditional perception of a hacker is a nerd sat in a dark basement trying to hack into secret government files. But I think that perception is slowly changing. Do you foresee a time when hackers are a legitimate profession? Yeah,
absolutely. I think a huge part of it is the more people understand it. I mean, I'm sure everyone's seen Die Hard and all these movies that make a hacker seem the exact stereotype you've just kind of explained to us. But I think there will come a point where everyone sees the offensive side of security and they see the benefits that it's having towards the security industry. I mean, it works realistically, and the more that we can prove, look, we looked at it from this angle, we got a hacker in to do this, and he managed to point out where someone malicious could come in and exploit our organisation.
Now, bug bounties are becoming increasingly popular as a means to incentivize hackers. Do you think there's a place for challenges like Hack the Hive in raising awareness of security?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say incentives like this and competitions like this are really good for getting people involved, especially if the likes of yourselves who are all kind of developers. I think you'll have a lot of developers looking towards you as well, and when you are doing things like this for security and you're showing that you're actually implementing and thinking about security the whole way through your process, I mean, it's brilliant for you guys, and I think things like bug bounties are always going to kind of get people interested. I mean, everyone loves winning things like this, and luckily I was lucky enough to win this.
So do you think getting into the sort of the mindset of a hacker rather than viewing things as a developer, do you think that can help build more secure software?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the kind of premises, and it's quite a sad thing actually, that my course taught me was to always be quite cynical, and especially when you're developing things. It's great to develop something and go, it does what I want it to, it's pretty, so it's perfect. And then you get someone like myself comes along and breaks it to pieces, and then you need to start all over again. Whereas if you can kind of be cynical throughout the whole development process and think with everything you're doing, all right, have I implemented that correctly, and could someone exploit it? How would they go about exploiting it? If you're constantly thinking like that, then it's going to save you a lot of kind of trouble in the future.
Yeah, sure.
Great, well thanks very much, Callum, for coming and speaking to us today. One more thing to do before you go, present you with your prize.
Hey.
So Sennheiser headphones, well done.
Congratulations.
Cheers, guys, thank you very much.
No worries, so if any of you were keen to have a go at Hack the Hive but missed out this time, don't worry. We'll be running it again in time for Scotsoft in September. So keep an eye out on our Twitter page for updates.
So from all of us here at Swarm, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Nice.